Thanks for your time, Duane, Elaine, and Bruce. This is awesome.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Duane, you were on the first planning committee for the Thanksgiving retreat 50 years ago. Can you talk about that?
That's right,
Who was part of it?
1969. Was thought of this might be an interesting thing for the youth to do, and to get out in Luther Village. It was still fairly new as part of our Manitoba conference at that time. And so we had several of us. I was vice president. Ken Kalk from Toulon was the president. John Tomczyk was our treasurer, and Margaret Sader, who we still see occasionally, she was our secretary. So there's kind of some stories that like we sort of even reminisce now when we get together and talk. But it was an interesting thing. We didn't have the bus. There was no bus to get out there. I think there was one bus, but it wasn't, I'm not even sure how it came about, but I remember being driven out by one of our members to get out there, because we had to be out as executive to set things up and whatnot. It was interesting being out at the camp at that time, because really all the summer activities had finished, and it was like a bit of a break. And then they said, well, we could do a Thanksgiving retreat. Okay, let's try it and see what happens. And also brought a little extra revenue to the camp too at that time. So, and then after that, from 69, 70, Bruce, you I guess were involved with.
Yeah. Back in those days, the understanding was you had to be confirmed in order to go to the Thanksgiving weekend. And so most churches were all on the same page in terms of the confirmation program. So most churches you were confirmed at the end of grade 9, and then come fall, it was you were grade 10. So I know in the early years we would have a communion service out there, but then as younger people started coming, and it was before communing and the baptized, you have to wait till you're confirmed to be communing. And there was one of the issues was, what do we do with this service and communion? Because some young people are not communing at their home church, and if we offer it, if they take it, and are we going to get in trouble? And all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was, and then Duane mentioned 69 to 70 was the year when we went out with a bus, and there were always people with cars too, and it was, Luther Village had a bus in those days, and we left Winnipeg on the Friday evening, and it was fine, and on the way there it started snowing, and really quite heavy, real heavy, wet snow, and we would have to stop the bus multiple times on the way there to clear the snow off the windshield and break the ice off the wipers, and the bus was even kind of sliding on the highway when we left the Trans-Canada down to the village, and it couldn't get up the hill to get into the camp, so we had to carry all our stuff in.
Slide down the hill,
Yeah.
let out when the snow
People were
was
sliding on their suitcases and their duffel bags down their hill. And the snow stayed all weekend. It was quite deep. It was, by the time it stopped snowing that Friday night, it was, I'm old school, it was like about 8 inches deep. It was quite a deep snowfall. And then when we left Sunday, much of it had melted, but there was still snow, and people were throwing snowballs and having some fun.
Yeah. And the next year you were like, let's do it again.
Yeah.
One of the years too, I don't recall having been on the bus, but I heard the story. Didn't a wheel come off one of them?
That was when we went to Thunder Bay for a spring convention.
Oh, that was a
Wheel
different
fell off the bus.
That was a different story.
Different story. Yeah. And Duane mentioned some people, but in the early years, some of the pastors that worked with us were Dennis Lewick, Ben Coldfett. Ben was out at Brunkild, and Dennis Lewick was here at Redeemer. And then
So Norm Miller, I think, was the first one.
Yeah.
He was at Cross Church.
Okay.
yeah, and then shortly thereafter, after Ben and Dennis, Terry Simonson was the associate or assistant, I don't know the terminology, at Lutheran Church of the Cross, and he worked with us on the planning committee for many of those.
I just saw him a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
In Swift Current.
Yeah. So Terry Simonson was involved with that,
What session did he do in the 70s that was so dynamic? I mean, he's a dynamic person all around, but was it frog kissing? Was it something like that,
yes.
that we did some kind of sessions on?
Yeah,
It
the
was
theme was
really-
frog kissing.
Yeah, it was a really dynamic.
There was warm fuzzies and cold pricklies.
Yeah, I remember that,
Yeah,
yeah.
so it's about relations.
Yeah,
There's a lot of small group stuff.
yeah.
You know, text, Bible text to think about. And, yeah. So it was good. It was powerful.
Oh, one of the ones, I can't remember what year it was, but it was hilarious. We did the dating game. No, the newly-wed game. And Harvey Wagner was the moderator, and we had different people matched up, and was Mark Warmonger, who was the pastor, assistant pastor at Cross, and he had a wig on, you know, he played a female. It was hilarious. Yeah, that was lots of fun. And anyway, the name's escaping me right now, but those kind of things like skits, you know, that and the kids loved it because these adults are acting foolish, and it's wonderful stuff, right? And you can get away with it, you know.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's the type of thing probably that happens in the village all the time.
Yeah.
One of the other ones that stick out is, wasn't it you and there was a group that put together a presentation
Oh yeah.
with Harry Chapin, and we still sing All My Life's a Circle, like it just comes full circle, right? Remember that you guys put together? Wasn't it you?
It was Cat Stevens, I think, was the music.
Cat Stevens, yeah.
Was it Cat
And the
Stevens?
theme was freedom.
Oh, it was Cat Stevens, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, we did that.
And that was when Ben and Dennis were working with us, because we went to their house one night and we were putting together this live presentation.
Yeah. Still
It was kind of really old school, and so, you know, before computers and all that, so we were actually,
2 slide projectors we had going.
yeah.
Wow.
And so to try to get words on the screen, we were taking spoiled slides that were black
Yeah.
and then scratching them with a pin or an X-Acto on them, so that when you shot it on the screen, you would get this word.
Yeah.
so it was Cat
amazing.
Stevens.
1973 or 74.
Yeah. And in the early years, there was one year, and I can't remember which one it was, it would have been the early 70s. You know, youth habitually register late. And so we kept going to the village and saying, okay, we got this many now, we got this many now, we got this many now. And it was even a couple days right before, but we ended up having like 150 people up there.
Wow.
And where there's the play structure now, there used to be a huge building in the very early years that was used as a chapel. But then when the chapel was built, there was this huge sort of building, and much of it was storage. We had people sleeping in there, we had people sleeping everywhere. And what they did for the meals is they cooked the meals in the kitchen, and then they set it all out on all the countertops in the kitchen like a buffet, and we'd come in the back door. The kitchen's been changed now. We'd come in the back door, grab a plate, get our food, go in, sit down, and as soon as you were done eating, you had to get rid of your dishes because somebody else, you know, because it
This wasn't enough.
revolving, yeah. And I know Alf Sander was the director that year, and he said, never again, no more. It has to be capped at such and such, so it's, yeah.
Well, it was popular.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
popular
Yeah.
time for,
And I mean, it continues to be popular. And, one of the things I heard from Larry was that it was divided into 2, I guess, for a time, for maybe a decade or so, in the
Okay.
late 90s into the 2000s.
yeah, with different age groups maybe.
Yeah, that's right. That's how they ended up
Yeah.
choosing.
Ah,
That's
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that's right.
So
See, I wouldn't be yeah.
that would have been past the time you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the age to go has sort of continually moved down now. What is the age to attend now?
Well, I think what happened was that the way it was described to me anyway was that there ended up being registrations coming in late, particularly from rural areas, and now I mean with email anybody can sort of contact at any point and get the information. But then they would even I think just mail slowed it down, and so their registrations would come in, they'd hit the cap point, and then they had to turn them away.
Yeah.
So they decided, I think maybe when Elaine was in the assistant position, to do the two.
Two different ones, yeah.
That's right.
Right, yeah.
And then they brought them back together maybe around 09, 10 or something like that.
Because in the early years, literally everybody was senior high, and we also had people coming out, university students participating.
Mhm.
You know, there was LSM,
Okay.
but some people for the first, 2-3 years of university had a foot in each camp, so to speak. They were still coming to, and back in those days it was called the Manitoba Federation Lutheran. That's
Okay.
what planned the retreat and the group. And so some people had a foot in both camps.
Yeah, like we were leaders and Webster University and, kind of like it was, but there were even some, I guess, that were participants, not leaders.
Yeah, yeah, they just came because, they loved coming.
Mhm.
So what year was it that you started as the president?
Okay. What year? I can't-
73 was when we did, I think, was the slide presentation.
Yeah,
You
so
would have
I've
been
been there.
Your second year of university?
I started university 73, so I was on the MFLL before that.
Was that-
71, I'm guessing.
Did you serve, you didn't serve as president right away, did you? When
No.
vice?
I was vice, and Randy Smith was president.
Randy was, okay,
Yeah.
Because then
And
it
it would
was,
have been like 71, I believe, is the year.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any stories to share?
You want to talk about Luther League times? Like, was that
Yeah.
something that you're involved in?
well, but the reason I asked is because then I was on the board. There was Lori, right? Lori Santa. And
No, Lori Nelson.
Lori
Nelson.
Nelson.
Yeah.
Who else was with us? There was Kathy
Yeah,
Zimmerman.
and Lori and you and me. In the early years, Jim Reish,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Jim.
Yeah.
Wojciechowski,
There was a whole bunch of
Bill
us.
Ursel, they were,
We would meet at different homes, but I mostly remember the Zimmermans. Do you remember any other places that we would meet?
there were several homes.
Several
but
homes,
quite often
yeah.
we meet at Kathy's home.
Yeah, so I think I was just finishing grade 9, and it was the October, so I was going into grade 10. And I had this kind of liking to this one young man. And we were 2 buses at the time, right? 2 buses.
That's great.
And there was another young man who had a liking to another girl. Can I use names?
I don't know.
Anyways,
I can edit
You
that.
can use our names.
I got on one bus, this other woman got on another bus, and these guys were talking apparently, and they said, oh good, you go on that bus, I'll go on this bus.
Because you're on the executive.
But the girl gets off this bus and comes over to the bus that I'm on, and we're together, and they're having this little discussion. Apparently, maybe you should be telling this. You said, no, you're on that bus. We decided that already. So hence, that's when we kind of started dating.
Yeah.
Was that 72?
1973.
73, and we dated 5 years and been married 41. So Luther Village has been a good place for us. For me anyways.
Yeah, it's
It's a good place,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so, but as a kid, I always looked forward to those weekends. Just being away from home and being in a place that is so beautiful and so, it was like our sanctuary, right?
Yeah.
It was, so hence we still are going out there. Loving it.
It is gorgeous. I think for youth, and probably for the Thanksgiving retreat
Yeah.
weekend too, for a lot of them, it's probably their first time, or
Yeah.
among the first times of them being away from their parents for an
Exactly.
overnight or
Yeah.
3 nights. So
A couple nights,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Which is kind of huge. It's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah.
free.
And I could do what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
One of the issues we had in the early years too, where Duane mentioned, he mentioned 2 buses, because there was a window of time where we would just have 1 bus, and so a lot of people would come out in cars.
Okay.
And what would happen in those days is you'd have young people taking off in their car and going to Kenora and grabbing a carload of kids.
Right.
And so you was
That'd be
trying
worrisome.
to manage all that, and so that's why we went to 2 buses, and we said no youth can bring a car out, because it was creating issues, because you'd have
What was responsible?
well, yeah, they'd be
Exactly.
taking kids from other youth groups or
Oh, wow.
other towns and piling, that was back in the pre-seatbelt day, piling them more than should be allowed in a car and taken off on to Kenora.
I'm not sure if it still happens, but a few years we actually had people from Thunder Bay come
Okay.
as
Yeah.
well. And they'd come in a couple of cars or whatever, and that was kind of neat, because how often do you get to see or be together as this huge conference?
Yeah,
You
you're
have to get everybody together, so that was kind of neat.
I think it's another gift of the location of Luther Village too, is that it makes it possible for, like we've had that more times than not, even in my few years
Yeah.
with the Synod, that there's a van load that'll come from Thunder Bay as well.
Yeah.
And they don't get to the winter retreat, they sometimes don't get on the bus trip and stuff like that, so, yeah, it's important. Yeah, so Lutherans had a bit of a reputation, eh? Like, Kenora family, don't get in the car with the Lutherans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But I think it's just neat how, we're talking 50 years ago, and we still see the people that we made friends with out there and became really strong youth people in churches. And now 50 years, we're still connecting with our friends. And I know the time that you and Miles had a whole bunch of us over, and just kind of
yeah.
enjoyed each other's company still 50 years later. We're
Yeah.
going strong.
Yeah.
It's amazing, those are deep connections.
Mhm.
Well, it's interesting when you sent the email about some other people, and then I sent you an email back, and it's interesting that 2 of the people from the early years who were involved with the Thanksgiving weekend are now church secretaries.
Right? Yep. Yep.
And
That's true.
and then there's other of us, or pastors, Larry and myself, and people heavily involved in their churches. So.
Yeah, it's been good leadership development too, in terms
Yeah.
of making those connections.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit about when you entered into ordained ministry too, and the years of youth ministry, and maybe where the Thanksgiving retreat fits into that?
Okay. When I was called to serve at Grace Lutheran Church, I was called as the associate pastor with specific responsibilities in youth and Christian education. So there's a window of time where we continued on with that. Back in those days, there was a group called MYCE, MYC, Metro Youth, I'm not sure it was council or conference, you should know this, but there was also the synod level youth planning stuff, but MYCE was the Metro, and MYCE was the group that planned the Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay, all right.
So MYCE was kind of absorbed into the synod level, and and it became more of a synod
Cool.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Back in those days and back in the early days, we didn't have a synod music team,
Right.
but there'd always be people who were involved in their churches with guitars and stuff, so it was just sort of a ad hoc, a couple guitarists leading songs kind of thing.
But then, for a certain length of time in the 70s, we had something called a revised version.
Yeah.
And there were a number of people, Lori having been one of them, having sung in that.
Okay.
And Pat played the guitar, and Sandy and so on. So there was, and they would come up and lead the music, which
Yeah.
was really well done. In fact, that group, I think, got up to be about 30 people at one time.
Wow.
So that's a part of that history from the 1970s.
Mhm.
Lori could give you a lot more on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Thanks. Yeah.
When did the synod band come in?
I can't remember when the synod started.
I think it started with on campus at U of M with our likeness. That's what I've heard.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Elaine sort of expanded it into, let's try and do this as a regular monthly thing.
Yeah.
Because I think there were early services at
Is that,
Epiphany.
they're at Epiphany.
Yeah.
And they're always at Epiphany.
Okay.
Yeah, and, yeah. And then I think it's a much better model to move around.
Yeah, it gives
Yeah.
different congregations a chance to host. And all that.
Yeah, and I think when it was at Epiphany, it was with, you're right, it was with pastoral likeness, and it was sort of aimed more at university students, or maybe students who lived on campus, and,
Right.
or in one of the surrounding apartment blocks as a service to attend. I don't know, if it's within once a month or
Yeah,
some
I
other
think
pattern, yeah.
that's what I heard. And actually, I think Jason was involved in those early days with Chris Buffy and
Yeah.
maybe Terry Ward. No, escape him.
Okay.
So some of those folks.
Yeah. The pianist who was strong in those days was Kenneth Mann.
Right.
Yeah.
He's still a musician at Epiphany.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another way in which you sort of invite the involvement and leadership in
Yeah.
early years. And it
Yeah, and
continues.
they're, you know, the names are rolling out, they're still involved, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep.
it's kind of interesting,
It is, yeah.
yeah.
I can remember the times when he would go on the Thanksgiving retreat. And of course, we live next door, and at times when you met here, right?
Yeah.
The kids, I think it was it all four of them?
Depends what year it was.
Well, there were times when the kids would just stick their noses up against to see who was there, and there were other times when they'd run out and they would know people, and yeah. But it was bittersweet because we were at home
Mhm.
and he was out, and the kids thought they should be going too when
Right.
they were little, but yeah,
Well, as they got older, they were.
they did,
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, that's
They
right.
did.
Yeah, yeah. My eldest is actually grade 7 this year, so
Oh,
in
my.
theory could go to Thanksgiving retreat.
Yes.
I mentioned it, and she's a little bit hesitant, but
Okay.
See, one of the advantages when you're on the planning committee, whether you can determine where the bus is doing the pickup.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Swing by Charleston
So
first, then we'll go
right.
for more.
So, yeah, so there were quite a few years where I had the buses
Yeah.
pick up here at Grace.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's self-serving, but,
But I mean, if you're getting a good sized crew from Grace anyway,
yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so,
You were a speaker at a retreat. That's more recently, but about 15 years ago, were you saying?
yeah, they wanted a retreat on, they came to me and the theme they rolled out was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
And
And I
So,
said, okay.
so talk about the 70s then, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but there was, and actually that retreat, it was the first session was the Saturday morning. We actually started by watching a movie because the movie that came out around the time was Almost Famous.
Hmm. Yep, I didn't know of that.
Yeah, and it was
Kurt Vonnegut, was that?
Pardon me?
Was it around Kurt Vonnegut's life? Is that the one I'm thinking? I might be thinking of something else.
Yeah, it was. They were following a band.
Oh, a band. Oh, okay, all right.
And there was sex and drugs and rock and roll. So like,
Okay.
the first session was, we just watched this movie. And then the next sessions, we were in small groups. And I created all kinds of, handouts and things, questions to discuss and think about.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Any other stories or things that come to mind? I mean, that's great. Thank you very much for what you shared.
Well, one year, when we had booked 2 buses, and they were highway buses, and the bus driver, we were telling him, don't go down the hairpin, and the bus driver was quite, I can drive this bus anywhere, and he drove it down the hairpin, and he couldn't get back up. Yeah. And back in those days, that was before the fire in the 70s, they had this old army Jeep.
Oh, yeah, that red Jeep.
A red Jeep. And so the Jeep had a winch and a 4-wheel drive, so they hooked the cable around a big tree partway up the hairpin so that they could pull it up to the flat area with the Jeep. So they had the Jeep in four-wheel drive with the winch going, and it was pulling this highway bus up the hairpin. And then the tree came out of the ground, roots and all. And the Jeep was just all four wheels, and it just slid back down the hill right in front of the office.
The bus did.
Yeah, so then they went back and they wrapped the cable around a much bigger tree. and the old Army Jeep pulled this highway bus up the hairpin.
Wild.
Yeah, with the winch and the four-wheel drive, it just, But it was just, funny because, well, it wasn't funny, but we were telling him, it's like, don't drive down the hairpin, I can drive with the bus.
Yeah.
Don't go down the hairpin! And then he can't get it out.
Yeah. Probably had an effect on his career.
Yeah.
Next time someone said, don't go down there, he didn't.
Yeah. I don't want to do that kind of thing.
I can go anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not.
But he managed to pull the bus up the hairpin.
Yeah.
And that was his Thanksgiving weekend, yeah. So,
Yeah.
Boy, we used to have the movie nights too. Remember the
Yeah.
movie?
in the early years, it used to always have for some reason, it was tradition to get a horror movie.
Yeah.
And was it like a real?
Real, yeah. There's no
Project-
no, it was real instead of
It
projector.
was even before the videotape in your home.
Sure. Yeah. I do have memories of those reel-to-reels from grade school because
Yeah.
it'd be like sometimes they put them on.
Thanks,
but-
Tyler.
yeah. But yes, it's true. VHS came out in the
Yeah.
80s, so it's
Yeah.
kind of rough.
Yeah, so you get this movie, and there used to be a couple reels of it.
Okay.
You'd show this horror movie.
Yeah.
And some of, especially the young girls, get watching it, and all of a sudden somebody would go and grab their shoulder from
Yeah.
behind them.
I think it was a ploy just to keep everyone in their cabins at nighttime, right?
Scare them.
Scare them into their cabins. You stay there now.
They go to the
Somebody
woods
might
in the
come.
dark.
Peeking in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Maybe Elaine, could you talk a little bit about the surroundings there? Like I know that the buildings have been put up. We talked about the chapel not being there in the early days and that being built later on. But what did it look like?
When I first started going out there with my folks, it was, there was no chapel. There was a cabin, which basically it was, the water was coming in. And it was right close to,
It's right by the dock.
right by the docks. And I remember people staying in that cabin, and I just thought, whoa, they're gonna be gone, floating away. There was,
So it was right down on the beach then. Right?
yeah, it was right close, what's there now? There's the
But they have that boathouse shop
Oh,
there.
okay.
But it's
It
even
was
set
even-
back a
yeah.
bit
Right, and
from
it's
where
lifted
this
up.
cabin used
Yeah.
to be. That little,
Yeah,
Right.
the cabin used to be, and as Elaine said, the water would be lapping
slashed
against
up against there, yeah,
the one outside board, yeah.
yeah.
The sound is okay, the wetness is not.
I think at the time they were building the chapel, I know my dad helped out in the Shiwi chapel. I can remember going out in a trailer that my folks had, and it changed a lot in that the cabins are now on stilts. They used to be on the ground,
But they
right?
raised
They
cabin
raised-
2 and 3
Yeah.
and, yeah.
What else is different in there?
Well, in the early years, there were, along the beach at the far end where you have the elk house and the 3 A-frames and the duplex, in the early years those weren't there. But there were log cabins that went all the way up, closer to the road than the current A-frames. But there was log cabins, and a couple of them were really quite big.
The other piece that I remember is that road came right onto the beach. So you'd be sitting on the beach and you'd have this vehicle coming right behind you. Do you remember that?
Yes.
They used to have the road come right onto the beach. And it was always,
Yeah.
I had to, I think my folks told me several times, be careful, sit closer to the water. Because It was
Well,
a busy place.
What they did was, where the washrooms are now, they've taken the road from the bell past the washrooms and then dropped it down in between Snake Pit, and I can't remember what cabin it is.
Mhm.
That road never was there. And when you
Right.
would access those cabins, you'd come hook around by the boat docks
Right.
and you'd drive, where the beach sandy area is, you'd
Yeah.
drive right along there.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
the way up to the cabins.
It was different,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, there were log cabins that went all along the front, and plus there was a house where the cabin is halfway up the air. I always get the names all mixed up. But there used to be a cabin, and they called it the greenhouse because it was painted green on the
Yeah.
outside. So it wasn't a log cabin, it was more of a traditional type of cabin.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then there was a huge cabin where they do have the beaver lodge now, and those cabins burned in the fire, and the ones where the A-frames are at the far end of the lake, they burned in the fire too. There were 2 fires that rolled through there in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they were able to, I know there was some water bombing done, so they water bombed the dining hall and a few other things to just,
Yeah,
so
they're-
some of the buildings were saved obviously, but some
Yeah.
of the more outlying buildings were lost.
The other piece was then that some of those log cabins, they actually had, this is gross, but it was an outhouse in the cabin.
Okay.
So, remember those?
Yeah.
Oh, it was awful.
And I think they may have gotten rid of those by the time.
They have. Oh.
By the time the Thanksgiving weekend started, but in the early years,
Right. Which is only about 5 years before.
Yeah.
Because it was 64.
because it was
Yeah.
this old fishing camp, as
Right.
you know, the cabins in the corner, and I know some of them, they turned it into a closet, but so many rentals have been done over the years, I don't know if the closet's still there. But there, as Elaine said, there was an indoor pit toilet in the cabin.
I was always hoping they
That's
didn't
gross.
get those.
That's gross.
Yes.
Hopefully a
It was
strong fan, but
terrible.
probably not.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, it
So-
was not the favorite place to stay.
There was a cabin as well, it was called the Summit, and it burned in the fire too, but nothing was put there. But out front of the dining hall and the office area, if you walk across the road, there's a plaque there and there's a rock. But there used to be a trail going up, and there's sort of a high rock outcropping. There used to be a cabin up there too.
Okay.
They used to call it the Summit. It was a smaller cabin, it slept maybe 4 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's
when you
good.
talk about changes in the physical
Yeah.
structure and plant, those things happened,
Yeah, it's quite a bit of change.
yeah.
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 That's great.
So I'm not sure how much else you want to know.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
helpful.
guess it's not only the site, it's the people,
Mhm.
it's the program, because there's generally always, like from year 1 on, there's been some kind of program, or theme or
Mhm.
discussion or, worship, singing.
Right.
you know.
Yeah, it's been, I think, a dynamic part of Synod life or just the wider church, because we're talking pre-merger too, like
Yeah,
pre-MNO.
pre-MNO, yeah.
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 So,
Yeah, that's right. 67,
Yeah.
or, well, 86, I guess I should say. 67 is when we became autonomous.
right. Oh, okay.
67,
Okay.
centennial year. So we had the camp. In fact, our home church put up the money for the camp way back in
In
64.
64.
64. Because I was out there with Bruce's dad.
Okay.
He was our confirmation teacher,
Okay.
and Bruce's mom, and he took our confirmation class out there when it was we had just purchased it, right? And it was like, I sort of vaguely remember some of these old, it was very,
Yeah.
there was, I can't remember what we did for washing. There was no showers at that point. Nobody had.
Yeah, the washroom facilities that are currently being used that are out of date, that wasn't there.
No, that wasn't, yeah. So-
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember the cook being out on the water, washing her hair.
Okay.
Deep brew shampoo.
Is
Yeah.
that Mrs. Duncan, by chance? Was she?
Yeah, no, Worcester or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
In terms of the facility too, like in the early years, when you come down the hairpin, halfway down the hairpin on the left-hand side, they've got a flower box with a flowers sign, "Welcome to Luther Village." There was no hydro or no electricity, but there was a one-cylinder diesel generator that would sit there that would basically make power for the fridge and freezer in the kitchen.
Okay.
And it ran literally one light bulb in every cabin.
Okay.
And it would just sit there going buck, 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 buck.
You know, day long.
And in the middle of the night, if it stopped, you'd wake up.
Yeah,
You say,
it would happen.
it's quiet.
Yeah.
What happened?
Exactly. Nice.
Hi, come on, come see Grandma.
Hey.
Can I leave her?
Yes, you sure.